good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're at. Thanks for joining. This is Workout Wednesday Live, week 42. And we are in the third week of Community Month. So this is Kyle's guest, which is Sam Epley, and he has got a wild and fun Workout Wednesday challenge for us. So we're going to get a little bit of physics knowledge along with our data visualization practice. So it should be fun. Due to the nature of this challenge and some of the complexity that's going to go into it, I know that I'm going to need help. So I called in Sam to help us out. So Sam, welcome, and thanks for joining, and thanks for the challenge. So kind of introduce the challenge, talk about what was your inspiration for this challenge, and why you chose this as what you wanted to do for Community Month.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. Thank you, Sean, for the opportunity to come on here and share for me to nerd out on all things related to physics and baseball. So background to the challenge. So I grew up in a small farm town community in Iowa, and I was kind of not the runt of the litter, but I was kind of a small kid. So football, I got killed. Basketball, I was too short. Baseball, I got to swing a bat. I got to run. I got to hit. I got to slide around. I got to catch. So for me, it was kind of a way to normalize kind of the playing field in a way. So I grew up watching baseball, loved baseball, played too many hours of baseball video games as a kid, Triple Play 2000 for like Windows 98.
Oh, yeah.
All that good stuff. And this year in Major League Baseball, there was kind of a fairly significant historical event that took place. Aaron Judge for the New York Yankees. I'm not a Yankees fan. Go Sox. White Sox, that is.
There you go.
And he broke the 61-year record set by Roger Maris in 1961, which that record had beat Babe Ruth. It might have been 1927, where Babe Ruth hit 60 home runs in a season.
Mm-hmm.
And that had been kind of a record that had stood the test of time in the American League, at least. And Aaron Judge, on like the 161st game of the year, hit the 62nd home run to break Maris's record in the AL. And I don't know if it's able to be seen with the webcam or not, but on my whiteboard, there was a Twitter channel, Twitter thread called Would It Dong, where it basically sought to measure, based off of StatCast data, how far would a ball be hit and within a bunch of different ballparks, would it be a home run or not? So I was curious about that, and I didn't want to model out the actual distances of the outfield walls, because that would have ramped this up to a whole nother level. But because then you're dealing with not only just the X and Y position, but also the Z position in a three-dimensional space.
Right.
Which that's a future visit the day if someone's able to pull that off. So
That's right.
But yeah, I wanted to be able to see, okay, we have a ball in flight. Are we able to model based off of two metrics from StatCast? Can we plot out the coordinates over time to see, if it's a really, really high lofted ball, how far does it travel? And looking at kind of those two main components in order to try and understand how will it fly, how will it travel, and all those different things. And I realized that the requirements for this and the documentation that accompanies the challenge is probably, in all of the Workout Wednesday challenges that I've done, I don't think I've seen anyone write this much documentation to accompany it.
Yeah.
I did that because it is complicated. It is challenging.
For sure.
So, yeah.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, let's dive in, and let's do the easy parts first, because that's kind of the way that I like to do things, and then we'll dive into the trajectory stuff. So just going to so we're going to connect to the StatCast data, And let's take a look at what we've got going on here. So we've got date, hit direction, location. So that's a bunch of metadata about it, about the hit. And then we get air density, the distance, the exit velocity, the home run number, the launch angle, and the pitch velocity. So the pitch velocity is likely that's the miles per hour, I assume.
That's miles per hour of the pitch coming from the pitcher's hand.
Right. Cool. All right. So cool. All right. And then we have this. We need to densify the data somehow. So do we relate it or do we join it? That's the key.
You could do either. I did a relationship for mine.
That'll make a lot of the KPIs and other stuff a lot easier, I think. And that's just going to be it's going to be a cross join type of relationship where every field is related to every row in the densification, I assume.
Yep, that's correct.
Cool. All right. So to do that, we just I just did a relationship calculation on each side and just did 1-to-1. So every row on every row from the StatCast data is related to every row on the densification. So whenever we start densify this stuff, we'll get every row will be duplicated 100 times. So that's essentially what we're doing. So by doing it the relationship way, we still have two separate ones, and we'll only densify once we do it on a worksheet. If we did it as we mentioned just a minute ago when we talked about doing it as a join, if we did that as a join, that would create 100 rows. That would duplicate our StatCast data 100 rows, and it would be that way for all the time, right? So we would have to...
The data densification goes, it might be 221 rows. It goes in increments of 40ths of a second, from 0 seconds to 5.5. So yeah, for each, if you join it, you'd have 221 records per home run. Whereas if you leverage the relationship, it's only going to incorporate that the cross join type of functionality when you have both a dimension from the batted ball data for the home run number, and when you pull in a dimension from your data densification field.
Right. Cool. All right. Sounds good. All right, so let's roll here. All right, so let's just do. We'll do our very simple measure names and measure values to make our KPI up there. Don't know if that'll work. Don't need it on rows. We'll do it on text. Make sure we get everything. We don't need point. We don't need that. We need and we don't need the count. So we've got, and then we don't need the air density. We just need the count of home runs, the average distance, 412. The exit velocity is an average, and the launch angle is an average, and the pitch velocity is an average. Now what I'm going to do also while I'm here is go to launch angle and add that degree symbol. So we'll do format, make it a number, make it 1 decimal. Now we'll go to custom and we'll do a quick search for, I might have one in the, actually now that I think about it, surely the, so we'll do it right here at the end. We'll get our, we don't get that. Tableau on Macs do not support the function key to get your extra keyboard, but it's all right. We'll do degree symbol ski, and we'll just copy that guy out. Come back to Tableau, and we'll just add that right there. There we go. And you can see, it added it as a, that looks...
You might have to put it in quotes.
Yeah. Because it added it. but it added it, but it has like an underline under it, which is weird. Here, we'll find it. We'll find it. So, yeah, there we go. Let's try this. If not, we'll roll with it. There we go. All right, now we've got that. All right, so entire view. We'll hide our measure name header. We will add measure names to text. So here's something that's interesting. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, Sam, but right now on my marks card, I have measure values and measure names, and I have measure values on top. It is measure values is on top of measure names. But when I go to text and I go to edit my text, my measure names is now on top of my measure values.
Because it's sorting it alphabetically, I think, in your tooltip, or maybe in your label. I think that's why it's doing it. Which it's a weird nuance where it's in a specific order and it appears that way in the view, but then when you go to edit it, it's pulling them in alphabetically. So.
Yes, I've never understood that. I've asked them to fix that, but they apparently that's too low of hanging fruit for them to think about. But that's all right. Okay, so let's do. Oh, what do we say here? Maybe we'll go 18 on that, and we'll go.
Let me.
We'll do.
I mentioned that specifically in the documentation.
Oh, look at you! You're good.
That is so. The value font for the value size is 24.
24.
And then for the label, it's 11. And then the label font. So the color for the number is 4 zeros, an 8, and a 0. If you do custom hex, so 0 0 0 0 8 0. And then for the label, it's black. So 6
Got
zeros.
it. Yep. Cool. All right. Yep. That looks good to me. And we'll make that centered. There we go. And we'll change. We will rename. Not here. How about here? Nope, can't do
You should
that.
be able to alias it.
Yeah.
Alias your measure.
Oh yeah, you gotta alias the measure header. You can't measure it, which is interesting here. So we'll do home runs, and there we go. And we don't. So now we'll just do some formatting to get rid of the decimal place. All right. Distance is number with no decimal places. Exit velocity is a number with no decimal places. Angle will keep, and launch angle will keep that way. All right. That looks good to me. KPIs. All right. Next, we have 3 scatter plots. All right. We've got exit velocity. And we've got distance. Flip those around. Every pitch. Home run number as a distinct value there. Yep. Edit the axis. Nope. Include 0. Include 0. I will make these circles for now, and then we'll, if we have time, depending on how horribly I'm tortured during the physics exam, if we have time, we'll go back and we'll make those baseballs. But for now, we'll do that. All right, exit velocity, that looks good. Let's throw a trend line on there, a linear trend line. That looks good. We'll format that to make it a hash mark. Like that. Bump these values up just. I'll bump those up. Maybe drop the opacity a bit. And we'll add maybe a border there. There we go. Okay. All right. So there's one. Let's duplicate this, and we'll just change out our. We'll just change out that. So that's now launch angle. Duplicate this, And that's pitch velocity. And pitches will never be 0.
They'd have a hard time getting to home plate if they did.
Yeah, exactly, yes. There we go. All right. That looks good. All right, well, that took very little time. So, all right, here we go. Okay, so trajectory, given how complicated, yep, it is. So the general order, we need to start with our, I wonder if we just build out a crosstab, and if we can get all of our starting, so my thought process here is, let's build a crosstab that shows all of these different things, and then if we can build it out as a crosstab and get all of our numbers to tie out, then we can just switch that. We can just switch up our crosstab to a scatter plot, and then we can go from there. So that's how I'm thinking about it.
So I'd say probably just focus on one home run.
Yeah, that's probably right. So let's do that. Let's do that. We know that we're going to use point, because I assume point is going to be on our path shelf at some point whenever we create our line, potentially. Maybe it won't be, but that's the way that I'm thinking about it. So we've got not the sum, and we want discrete. All right. So for each point, so here's home run number 1. Here are the points. And the time interval is a dimension, and it's discrete. So every quarter of a second, no, not quarter of a tenth of a second. Yeah, okay. So yeah, 221 rows. Yes, that's right. Okay. All right. So the starting position, right? If we go back and we look up here, they all start at 0, right? So the starting X is 0, and the starting Y is 0.
Starting Y, so I have that at 1 meter.
Oh yeah, because it's not at 0, right? It's because it's at his belt, or it's at his chest, or right. It's above the. Yeah, it's above the ground. Yeah.
Yep.
And X is the point. X is the point where the ball hits the bat, right? So that will always.
Yeah, it's where it's struck.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're for the sake of this, we're assuming that the ball is struck 1 meter high, and I mean, it's feasible that depending on whereabout in front of or behind home plate, it's possible that if it was a pole, that it could be like, a quarter of a meter in front of the plate when the ball is hit, or if it's a push or it's hit late, then it could be. So for the sake of it, we simplify it to 1 meter high and right at home plate.
The ball didn't strike the bat. The bat struck the ball. Let's get our grammar right. Okay. Okay. So now we can do measure names and measure values. Starting X and Y. Measure names. Measure values. Okay. Let's see here. Position. The location of an object is specific point in time. Okay. But actually, yeah, okay, we'll figure that out later. Velocity is the rate of change over an object's position over an amount of difference in time. Is every quarter of a tenth of a second. acceleration. So the general order you will want to think about these equations: starting position and starting velocity. Well, the starting velocity is the velocity of it's the exit velocity. That's the starting velocity. And all these are constants, right? And so the change is the force, which is the drag of air, resistance, and gravity, changes to velocity. Okay. So we have up here, we have drag coefficient of 0.4. So what this is, so if I'm thinking about this right, if the drag coefficient is 0.4 and our exit velocity is 1.4, then essentially what's happening is after a quarter of a tenth of a second, this velocity will have dropped by 0.4.
So if you scroll down a little bit to the equations on drag, there it is, an acceleration. Yeah. So it's based off of several different factors. Really, the only things that are going to be changing are the velocity and the really small on my screen. So I'm just trying to remember. Come on, here we go. So the things that'll be changing in terms of drag per ball, really you have the air density estimate, which that's a manual adjustment because we can't calculate for what's known as the Magnus effect, or essentially the rotation on the ball, which causes like curveball spin. So the only thing that really changes by ball is air density, and then you have the starting velocity of the time step. Because that determines how much drag or how much force is acting on the ball at a given point in time in a given direction.
Mm-hmm. So exit velocity cross. So now I just need to. So this is 0.4.
Air density is provided in the data.
Yep.
Cross-sectional area
air density
that you can parameterize, and I think that's 0.00426, and that's in square meters.
Oh yeah, let's do that. Let's do. Well, I'll figure this out. This is velocity, or no, drag, right?
Yes, that's drag in the x direction.
Drag x. Oh, and then drag in the x direction. Okay, so then that leads me to believe that there will be drag in the y too, right?
Correct, because as the ball is rising, you have the force of gravity slowing it down, and then you also have the force of drag in the y direction.
So baseball 0.145. And we were talking before we jumped on this live stream that Sam did confirm that all of our units of measure will cancel each other out. So we don't need to do any additional conversions on these constants, which if you remember anything from your science and physics classes, that's like rule number one of being a scientist is make sure that your units tie out. Just like in data visualization and data analysis, your numbers have to tie out to what's in the back-end database. In science, you got to make sure your units of measure tie out. In mathematics in general. So this is the baseball mass, 0.145. I'm just going to add these constants in real quick so I don't have to keep writing it. We have the cross-sectional area, which is 0.04426 raised to the power of 2. And then we have the drag coefficient.
drag coefficient, that's essentially based off of the shape of the object as it flows through a fluid or a gas. So for a sphere, it's 0.4. Everything I could find on the documentation around baseball drag suggests it should be 0.4.
Yep. Gravity. Everything in this world falls at 9.81 meters per second squared. Why? Oh, we did that. Yep, that's we did that. So I don't need to do that one. Time interval. Yep, we did that one. Conversion. Okay, we'll figure that out later. All right, so I've got all my constants here. So now we'll go back to the drag of x. This 0.5 is a constant. This 0.4 is the drag. This 0.044 is the cross-sectional area. Drag of x. And I'm getting zeros. Is that just because they're super, super small numbers?
The y drag force, so...
Yeah, it's right there, yeah. But it's so these are just constants right now. At some point, I'll have to introduce, right? Because this is just these numbers. These drag x's are not changing because I haven't done anything. We're just calculating for one point, right? And then for each point. So right now, let's just do this. Keep only. Yeah, there we go. This will make it. I feel like this will make it a lot easier to understand. Okay, so drag x. So I probably need drag y now.
It's the exact same equation, except the difference is that you need the velocity in the y direction.
Yeah. That is the exit velocity. Cross-sectional area. Say that again. You want what?
So,
Go
one
ahead.
thing that you're going to want to do, if in the documentation you go to kind of the midpoint of the velocity section, you need, so velocity when the ball and the bat strike, the ball flies off at a launch angle. We have to convert the vector of velocity into its x and y components. And that's where we use the trig equations of sine and cosine.
Got it. Okay. So that's that.
And that initial velocity will only be kind of in effect for that first timestamp of time equals 0.
Oh, got it. Okay, so the initial ball velocity is 0. Using trig, we can break the velocity into its respective x and y components. For the x horizontal and the y vertical, determine the exit velocity cosine of the launch angle and exit velocity. Okay.
So my recommendation
Yeah.
would be to first take your exit velocity that's in miles per hour and convert that to meters per second.
Okay.
That way you have that in that set of
Yeah.
units. So I think
So
that,
this
I think
is
you divide that by 2.237, I think is the conversion rate.
exit velocity meters per second is exit velocity, and convert miles per hour to meters per second is divide that by 2.237. Yep. Okay.
So now you have a unit of measure that's appropriate for projectile motion equations. And with that, then what you're going to do is you're going to use the sine and the cosine on that to calculate out the initial velocity in meters per second in the y direction and in the x direction.
So that's where I'm using this, right?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So the x horizontal is the exit velocity in meters per second times cosine of radians of the launch angle. And the y vertical, nope.
You basically duplicate it and just
Do the inverse.
change it to sine.
Yep.
Yep.
Horizontal.
Going back to 7th or 8th grade trigonometry here.
That's right. Sine.
Which I have to give credit to. It might have been either Ken or Kevin Foilet, one of the twins. They have a really good series of how to use trig in Tableau. Highly recommend that as a resource.
Okay, so now that we have that, we can. So am I using the x and y horizontal and vertical in the drag calculations?
Yeah, for where time step equals 0, or point equals 1. I think in your case there.
Yeah.
Because that is the initial velocity, and that velocity remains. Because of how it's calculated, it remains constant throughout. Because you're just dealing with the initial velocity off of that for that first time step.
Right. Got it. Okay, so this drag here, so instead of using this exit velocity, it'll be the it'll be the previous value of this x horizontal, right?
So how I think I did mine is if like time interval equals 0, then we're computing drag here, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. So where so drag force in the x direction is going to be the velocity at the start of the step is the one that's involved there. So for time step time equals 0, it's going to be the initial velocity if you're calculating x drag, the initial velocity in the x direction.
So okay, so times, I'll wrap this in. So if time interval equals 0, then use the x horizontal, else. So did you create two calculations and then coalesce them together, or did you like do this where?
So,
because if
the majority of what's taking place on my end is, I have in my starting velocity calculation. So I say if the time interval equals 0, then use the initial velocity in whatever direction you're calculating. Otherwise, and this is where it gets a little tricky with using previous value, you use the previous value of velocity, apply the drag calculation, which that calculates the force. If we're calculating in just the x direction, and I'll drop it.
Here, let's do this.
Drop it in the,
Let's do this.
This is what I did for start x. I dropped it in the Zoom chat for you.
Cool.
So what you're going to want to search for is velocity start x.
Yep. That's what I. Okay. That's what I was. Yep. That's kind of where I was. Okay. So let's look at this. So if the attribute of time interval, which we need to aggregate, it's because since we're using previous value, which is a table calculation, that means that we have to make sure that all of our other measures are going to be aggregated. So we're using, if the attribute is time interval equals 0, then provide the minimum initial velocity of x in the x direction. Else, give me the previous value of 1 plus the drag.
Yep. And that's calculating the drag force. So to convert force into an acceleration, which we can then use to apply against velocity, we divide the force by the mass, which gives us our acceleration.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you take that acceleration rate, multiply that by the time step, which time step is 1/40th of a second, that tells us how much did the velocity change over that time.
Yep. Oh, look at that. That's sad. In Web Edit, you don't get the, when you click on a calculated field, it doesn't change what's over here like in desktop. That's interesting. Okay. Okay, so, whoop. Yeah. Okay. So is that, so that's that. What's this initial velocity x?
That is the, when we broke out our velocity into the x and the y component. Using
yeah. Okay,
okay. That's what that's doing.
Yeah, that's what you called it. Okay, so velocity start x. Attribute is if the time interval. Okay, so I was kind of in the same.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of in the same way, but you've got yours wrapped on the outside of it, where I've got mine kind of on the inside of it, because these don't change, right? But I do need it. So this will be a. Just trying to think of this. Does it matter if you? Well, let's just try it. Let's just try it. The worst is it doesn't work. Is 0, then min of the x horizontal this guy, get rid of this.
So I think the error you're getting is because you used calculated field as opposed to parameters. You have to aggregate them. I think.
Oh.
Previous value.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. I see. Okay, so let's get out of this. So that's a good. Yeah, that's a good idea. So this will just be. All right, so baseball mass.
But as we're walking through this, I'm realizing this is really complicated.
Yes.
I feel sorry for all of the folks who, without these tutorial videos, they're going to be feeling like, how in the world did Sam do this?
Yeah. Let's do cross-sectional. And float at initial value 0.026. wait, no, I don't need to square that. I don't need to. It's it's not the value that needs squared. It's the unit of measure. So it's 0.00426 is fine. Okay, so we'll do that. Get rid of this. We need another parameter called drag coefficient, and that's 0.4.
And I think if we wanted to be super crazy with this, it's possible that the stitches on the baseball could impact the actual coefficient of drag on the ball, and that would be insane if you were trying to calculate that.
Yeah.
So we won't do that.
0.81. Yes. Well, I also was reading here. You're calculating the curvature of the Earth, like taking that.
So we're avoiding that.
Yeah. Thank you.
The air density estimate. That because the Magnus effect, which that's what allows a curveball to curve. Or if you've ever seen, I think there's a YouTube channel called How Ridiculous. It's these guys in Australia or New Zealand where it's kind of like Dude Perfect but down under.
Right.
And like they'll take like a volleyball or something and they'll give a bunch of backspin off of a dam and it will fly down and it'll curve away in this crazy way.
Yeah.
That's the Magnus effect.
Got it.
And StatCast doesn't give us that information for like the side rotation of a ball through its flight.
Yep.
So
cool.
Air density estimate calculates for all of that stuff to just kind of approximate it. So our estimate is close to the end final distance.
Yep. All right. So let's we're gonna call an audible here because you're gonna end up having to explain every calculation to me. So let's just walk through exactly what you did. So the first calculation that you created were the velocity of the start in X and Y, right?
Yep.
All right. So the time so what we're gonna do is we're gonna walk through Sam's solution, and we're gonna break it down we're gonna tear back the walls of physics and try and translate it into Tableau and figure out why all of these things are working. So we're taking the attribute of time interval equals 0. That means, and we can still since we're here, let's just go ahead and create this. So the attribute of time 0 equals 0. That's just an aggregation of time interval. It's gonna
saying when it starts at the starting point.
Right.
Reference the initial velocity.
Yeah. Is there a reason you used attribute as opposed to minimum?
I was really tired. I was doing a max calculation kind of in the background. I could zoom in and it'd be slightly faster.
Right. Because attribute, as people maybe don't know, attribute actually turns this into a window function. So attribute is actually a window function where minimum is an aggregation. So the min of time interval equals 0. Then provide the minimum initial velocity, which is what we calculated with
either the sine or the cosine.
That's right. If for all other points in time for a given point, then provide the previous value of velocity start x. And then add to that the drag for that specific point in time, right? So what's happening is that's how you this is what's going to kind of create that arc. So we have this part, that is the drag calculation, and then we're dividing the drag divided by the mass of the baseball, and then we're taking it times the interval of time, which is 0.025. So if we take another sheet here and let's just build this out. So we have home run number. Let's just show the folks what's happening, because crosstabs are sometimes easier when we're doing it this way and when things are really complicated. interval. And then we can start to do our measure names and measure values. We are not going to add every single measure name and measure value. We just want to do, right now, we'll have we'll do initial, position start X, position start Y. That's our first. And then measure names goes in columns, measure values goes in text. So as you can see here, we have the position of 0 and 1 to start with, and then we have really small decimals for all of that. And that makes sense because we're dealing with very small numbers. So Tableau doesn't know how to calculate those. Also, we probably need to calculate this table down. There it is. Or not pane down, table down. Just for the sake of this, right?
Yep.
So at every point, right? So for every quarter of a tenth of a second, you can see these are going up, and then it's going to reach an apex point, which is the highest point. And that could be a whole nother crazy physics calculation. Is if we wanted to calculate the apex of every single baseball, we would use these coordinates to find. We could use these coordinates to find the max apex of every curve. So then you can. We always, baseball always talks about the longest home runs, but who hits the highest home runs? That would be an interesting. Someone
with an exit velocity of 120 miles an hour and a launch angle of about 45 degrees.
Yeah, exactly. So then we have, so that's how we have that. And then what did we do next? Then we just did the exact same thing for velocity start Y. It's a very similar calculation, I'm going to assume. Yep.
It's basically the same thing. The one thing you need to incorporate is the force attributed to gravity. You have to add that in for the Y direction.
Which is what this, which is, if you saw, we just started with the negative 0.5, or the 0.5. But with gravity, we have to, or with the Y-axis, we have to take into the gravity force. So if we take a look at the gravity force of Y.
Mass times acceleration.
Yep, mass times acceleration. That's, and then, so that gets us the, we'll do fit width here, just for. And then what you did all those calculations, and then essentially what you did is you calculated for each point, right? But then what you did is and then you created where you basically take the X and you convert this back into feet, right?
Yep. And that's so that, because they're when the broadcasters are not saying, at least the United States, they're not saying, oh, he had a 86-meter home run. They're like, no, there's a certain number of feet. They don't put like 65 on the walls. They put like 400. So
yes,
yeah, converting it back to feet.
So the position end X and Y, how are those related to the position starts? Right. Okay, so so that's the previous right? We had to calculate this. We had to calculate the end in order to do the previous calculation, right? Or no?
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
In a way, yes. So the one place where I'm actually leveraging the end calculations, if you look at my X position and Y position start, because the thing that's actually plotted on that trajectory plot is the start positions.
Yep. Position N, position Y. Yep.
So what that's doing is that's looking to see if the ball, upon its return to the Earth's surface, Once it breaks through, elevation of 0, and it starts going negative, set that to 0. So it stays on the ground. And then for the X position, basically lock it in at the previous value. Yep. So then it stays where it hit, basically roughly where it hit the ground. It's not perfect, but it's close.
That's right. Yes, we'll take that margin of error. We'll take that one. It'll be all right. Yeah. Okay. Cool. And then what we end up with, right, is so you convert it to feet, and then you have this feet on the axis. Is that just a duplicate?
It's a duplicate without decimal points for the units.
Got it.
So I don't think I figured out how pane and header, how those work in terms of when you're setting units for values. So I break it out into 2. So you have a nice clean label on it, and then in the tooltip, then you have more granular with decimals.
Right. All right. So then the way that so once you create those calculations, then you're ready to put all this stuff in there, and essentially what we've got is, the tooltips. Yeah, there we go. So we've got some really awesome tooltips that tells you where he hit the home run, the date, the pitcher, everything about the pitch, everything about the home run, and after 2.5 seconds, which is what the pages shelf does. And so what's really cool is if you take this and you drag it all the way down to 0, every single baseball is at 0, is at 1-0. But then you can play this, and you can actually see all of the. You can see how all of the home runs take their shape in Tableau, which is pretty rad, to be honest. And then, so if you're ever, dealing with the pages shelf, things you need to keep in mind for the pages shelf, as we saw, as Sam mentioned, you have to have a point in time for each tale that you want to see, right? So that's why this is the reason why. It's one of the reasons why he had to have the densification in there, is so that we could actually plot, right? Because it would be much simpler to just do, to just calculate based on the position, based on the beginning position, and all of these numbers. You could calculate where it landed, right? That would be a pretty easy calculation, and it would just be 2 points or 1 point, and that would be it. But to show the actual arc of your home run, that's why you need to densify everything and then do all of the gravity calculations. But one of the benefits that you get out of that is through Tableau on the pages shelf, you can actually watch how each home run, like you can really see that these two up here took very, very similar travel, right? They were both, looks like, hit at, if we pause this, I'm just fascinated by these two. Both hit at, so this one was over 10, the lower one was hit.
What are those home run IDs? What are those home run IDs? I'll look them up on my end.
Home run 27 and 23.
27 and 23. So they had launch angles of 41 degrees.
Yeah.
So
really, really high.
Yeah.
Almost as high as you can hit it. And they were hit off. What's interesting is that the pitch that was higher at this point in time was over 10 miles an hour slower than the one over here, right? This pitch was at 89.7 miles an hour, and this pitch was at 75.2. And they were hit at the exact same launch angles, but the slower ball was traveling faster
Yeah.
and further, which is interesting.
Yeah, home run 27 against the Rays. That one came out at just a slightly higher exit velocity. It was 109 compared
Yep.
to 107.3.
Right.
So at the end of the day, the pitch velocity, like if you get really clean contact on a ball and it gets, it's a cannon. If it's a 60 mile an hour eephus pitch or a 101 mile an hour fastball, like what matters is how fast it comes off the bat.
Right.
So.
And that kind of goes against what we were taught in little league, right? Which was always just if people are throwing if people are throwing you heaters, if you could just get contact on a heater, it'll travel, right? Which kind of makes sense, but at the same time, as we see here, it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing. So that's just really cool. You can spend if you're a baseball nerd. You can have there's some really cool insights that you can get out of making this. But
just for kicks, drag pitch type to columns.
Oh yeah, there you go. Pitch type, that would be. So this is going to show for each one. We'll go back to 2.5 seconds.
You could either do it on columns or rows, but if you drag it to the canvas, it'll basically break it out by all of the different pitch types that Aaron Judge encountered where he had homers.
Yeah. So look at that. 4-seam fastball and curveballs travel the highest at 2.5 seconds. And then what you can also see is at 2.5 seconds, it was still traveling up, right? It appears, at least, like if you look at these, like they've already hit their apex, right? But here it looks like they're still going up, which is interesting. So yeah. That's really cool. Nice. That's really cool. So yeah, nice job on this challenge. Like I said, I really enjoyed it. The math is difficult to wrap your head around, and certainly takes more time than what we've got allotted here. So definitely going to spend some time in reverse engineering this. But what I think what's really good to kind of keep in mind with these types of challenges, what they're really good for is, yes, as Sam mentioned, he said, well, wow, we're doing this live and Sean is really struggling with this, right? That's sometimes how our end users feel with our dashboards, right? Like we build the dashboard and we understand every single thing about it. Just like Sam built these calculations and understood everything about it, but then given to a layperson, completely lost, right? So, and even with all of the documentation that Sam provided, I was still kind of fumbling my way around it. So I think there's a good lesson. There's a good lesson here to take away, which is, aside from just learning physics, there's a really good lesson to take away, which is, really kind of keep your end users in mind, right? And their level of knowledge and expertise in what you're asking them to do. So, yeah. Any final thoughts or anything, Sam?
For those in the Tableau data fam community who are on the cusp or really trying hard to be part of the 100% club with Workout Wednesday challenges, I'm sorry.
Well, the good thing is that you've opened up your workbook, right? So we can go in and we can reverse engineer it, take a look at how things are done. So it's at least you didn't like completely close off. It could have been a lot. You could have made it a whole heck of a lot worse. But I feel like the amount of documentation that you've provided, the fact that you're giving people access to your workbook, I think is acceptable. So it's good. So yeah, appreciate it. And
Thanks for having me.
yeah, no, this was fun. This was a good time. We got to talk some baseball and talk about physics and learn some Tableau and go from there. So cool. Yeah. Yeah, Tim on the chat. Yeah, completely with you there, Tim. But thanks for watching. Appreciate it, and we'll be back next week, hopefully with a slightly less challenging challenge. But this was good. So appreciate it, Sam, and take care.